Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar for 2022. My name is Larissa Williams. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Diversity and Programs for Diversity MBA. Welcome to our members and friends. As I mentioned, this is our third SMART webinar series of the year. Most of you know that we host monthly webinars covering diversity, equity, and inclusion, and personal and professional leadership. We are so excited to celebrate Women's History Month with a very dynamic conversation about something that's very important to all of us, our mental health and wellness. Today's topic is lifestyle tools for mental health and wellness. So it's going to be a dynamic conversation. So it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our moderator and Diversity MBA's friend, Dr. Mary Donahue, who is the CEO of the Digital Wellness Center and digital psychology expert. Dr. Mary, I'll turn it over to you now.
Larissa, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for hosting this important webinar. Everyone on the line understands how COVID has had a negative impact on our lives. What most people probably don't understand is the trauma that many women in the workplace have experienced. And in some cases, 4 times more trauma than their male counterparts. Various reasons for that. But McKinsey's Women in the Workplace also point out that for women of color, this trauma increases 3-fold. So we have a lot of problems we want to get to, because one of the things that we haven't talked about is solutions and strategies to help you cope with post-COVID trauma. And today my guests are going to do that. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to work with both of these incredibly talented women. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to just read a little bit about their bios and then pass this over to them. I'll start with Dr. Bethany Lowe Presti. Correct? I made sure I said I practiced. I really wanted to practice. And excuse me, Dr. Lowe Presti is the Executive Director of Behavioral Health at Fodart and the Medical College of Wisconsin, and also an Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychology in the Department of Psychiatry there. She oversees the strategic plan of Fodart and MCW, aiming to improve behavioral health throughout the communities they serve. Bethany also serves as a clinician, specializing in mood and anxiety disorders. She lives in Milwaukee with her family. Can you tell? New glasses. And I also love to welcome my friend, my very new friend, Melinda Penny Washington. And Melinda's passion as a transformational coach, registered dietitian nutritionist, and certified diabetes care and education specialist is to bring a mind shift to the understanding of health and wellness. Using various approaches tailored to each individual's health, she creates an environment for people to experience holistic healing. Her holistic health and wellness coaching uses techniques from various cultures to guide clients in creating their unique wellness lifestyle. Ladies, welcome very much. I'm going to jump in right now, and I'm going to ask you very quickly, if you can, just to give us a little bit back and forth. We can talk about your backgrounds as we answer the questions just because of our time constraints. And feel free to just jump in. Either one of you can start with this question. I think it's an incredibly important question just to ground this conversation. And that is, how does poor mental health manifest in your day-to-day? So what are common symptoms of poor mental health and wellness that you've identified in your practices in post-COVID workplace? And have you found a difference between men and women? And I'll just lead off saying I'm a little prejudiced on this because in our mental health and wellness index, we did find a difference.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mary. I don't mind starting with this one while we're waiting for my partner here to sign on. I know it's so hard with technology, and yes, something that we're all experiencing more of, right, since the onset of the pandemic. I have definitely noticed the impact of the additional stress over the last couple of years, and with the post-COVID environment that we're in. I think that, what I see in my practice is, even though things may start calming down in the healthcare world, where we see COVID numbers going down, there's a sense of readiness to be ready to kind of overfunction again if the numbers go up. And I think that applies in different ways to different populations of women. It's not only in healthcare. Certainly, we experience it with frontline healthcare workers here. But I think everybody has this sort of sense of being ready to go again, with the multitasking that's involved with working remotely, working in a hybrid environment. And for those of us with families, that's a lot of juggling. And so we want to consider the family responsibilities as well. I think that, this is a good example coming out of these last 2 years of the effects of the pandemic. I think it's a good example of just how post-trauma works. It doesn't simply end when it's over, but there are a lot of associations that we make. It could be something as simple as sitting down in front of a webcam or having technology problems, right? It might bring on more stress because this is a part of now that trauma memory. And of course, that can involve things that are appropriate to be stressed about, such as somebody close to us being ill. But it can also, our brains are so efficient that they bring in all types of associations, good and bad. So we may be being triggered all over the place. And I think that because of the heightened sense of responsibility that women have typically in the family and the household, there tends to be more to balance. And I think sometimes a sense of more to prove in the workplace. And so I definitely see higher levels of stress in my female clients than I do the men. And not to say there's no stress for men either. It's just a different type of stress. And so that's, I think, part of what makes this conversation today so interesting.
And I think that's a lovely distinction. We're not negating the stress that men are experiencing. Believe it or not, the #1 clients at the Digital Wellness Center are men.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is, and we'll get into this, is telling women it's time to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Men are actually better at taking care of themselves than women.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to just pass it to my colleague, Melinda. Perhaps we could put up a picture of Melinda so we can all see her while we're struggling with some of these webcam problems. But Melinda, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the idea of stress manifesting in nutrition and mental health and cravings. I know when I'm stressed, I want certain foods or don't want certain foods, whichever the case may be, like anything healthy. But, are there other things that you're seeing in your practice as stress manifests in women's life?
Yes, and I agree. Thank you for that question. And I agree with Dr. Presti, our colleague here, Bethany, that women tend to be the primary caregiver in most situations. So not only do you see women have to carry the responsibility and sometimes the burden of work, but also coming home and having that what they call the second shift, right? And so with that sometimes added pressure, we tend to grab for something that will make us feel good. And believe it or not, carbohydrates, sugar, has the same pleasure pathway that releases of other substances, some drugs, that releases a feel-good feeling, serotonin, which you two are definitely aware of. So when some women feel stressed, what is a natural biological response for survival to turn off the fight or flight response is to grab sweets. So it's a survival mechanism. So that's what I'm seeing. And the average person during COVID gained 30 pounds. That's the average weight gain. And that's a response, I'm sure, to stress. And if we don't have another way to cope in place, then with sweets all around us is the access. And it's hard to stop that survival mechanism, that tool of trying to calm down.
That's fascinating to me. I actually did not know that sugar did that sugar brought us out of fight or flight. I just thought it was, we were trained to do that, you know, when you're little and your mom says, well, you had a bad day, let's have ice cream, sort of thing. I didn't know that it was in the brain. Thank you for that. Can I ask you both, in your minds, what does good mental health look like? And I'd like you both to answer this question. And specifically, like, how do we know if we have it? And how do we know if we're suffering or maybe on the brink and maybe need to take a little extra care?
Great question. Good mental health or wellness to me does not mean the absence of stress. Instead, I think it's feeling like we have the space and the mindset to cope with the stressors that are coming at us and maintain the balance that we're looking for in our life. We have to recognize that some stress is actually good and can be motivating. But when it's too much, it starts to tip that balance. And we really need to create that space so that we have the strength and wherewithal to kind of recalibrate when we recognize that it's getting too high. So I think, you know, one of the things that we're noticing is being at that sort of full level even before the pandemic. The onset of the pandemic really pushed a lot of people over that limit. And if we're not practiced in creating space to recognize and to employ some of our coping strategies, then we just stay at that heightened level of stress for prolonged periods of time. And that's when we start to notice negative manifestations in our lives.
Melinda, what do you want to add to that?
I really like what Dr. Bethany said about it's not about the absence of stress, but just recognizing both can exist at the same time. I love that song, Joy and Pain, like sunshine and rain, because it's part of life, and it's part of growth. And so to be able to sit and recognize that both are happening at the same time and then have tools to know how to balance the stress is important. For me, I look at health in a holistic way. I look at nutrition, of course, as a dietitian, and movement is part of that. So the body. I look at my my mind, my thoughts, the quality of my thoughts. Am I stressing? Am I able to regulate my emotions? Am I able to make healthy choices in the midst of a crisis? Self-awareness, and then joy. What is my capacity to feel joy? Because even in the most trying times, there's opportunity for joy and connection. And so I feel like healthy mental health, a healthy mental state of being, is being able to observe and assess how am I doing in these three areas, no matter what I'm going through at the time. And then having tools to be able to balance those three different areas in my life.
Which is a lovely segue into my next question. Absolutely perfect. I think I interrupted you, but I think you were going to get into three, like I want people to leave with just really right now, 3 proactive activities that we can each use to help us maintain good mental health. And I know that Bethany's going to talk a little bit about reciprocity, but Melinda, like when you were talking about joy, I was just like, oh, okay, like what can we do? Is that, maybe not eat sweets or just have a few sweets, but what would you say?
Oh, I think there's space for sweets because it's part of joy, right?
I needed to hear that. Bring those cookies.
Yeah, even as a diabetes educator, specialist, I tell people living with diabetes, it's okay to enjoy the sweets and understand what it is at that time and understand what moderation looks like for you. Because there's a tipping point when it can no longer be serving you, that particular practice. So there's definitely a place for joy. For sweets, I'm sorry. And also, I'm sorry, did you want to speak on reciprocity or
yeah, I think I'll add, yeah, Bethany was going to touch a little bit on reciprocity, but just when you were talking about joy and the quality of your thoughts, I thought, wow, as a coach, you must really, be dealing a lot with, helping people deal with their quality of thought.
Yes, around food specifically. And I have this practice called sacred nutrition, sacred nourishment and sacred nutrition. And it's creating a ritual around eating, making sure that when you eat, you're giving your food dignity by placing it on a plate as opposed to like a paper wrapper or a paper plate. Sitting and without a screen, or maybe with a loved one, putting beautiful music on the table so your mind can experience the food in the present moment and really enjoy each bite. Think about everyone who was involved to get that food on your plate, the farmer, the maybe the food truck driver, the grocer, just having gratitude for that moment and who prepared the food. All of that allows a sacred moment to happen around food. And then when you do eat that sweet, because you're so present, you won't need as much. You won't need as much. And it'll be more gratifying. And you'll even find joy because food is meant to be pleasurable. Absolutely. Healthy food can be very pleasurable. So yeah, that's how I would say to find joy in eating. Yes, in a healthy way.
Lovely. I love that idea. Sacred nutrition plate is a great idea. Bethany?
And just, I want to make sure that I'm understanding the question. Looking, Dr. Mary, at some proactive takeaways
Right.
for how to take good care. I think one of the best things we can do for ourselves, especially as women, is to stop and take inventory and really recognize how we're feeling from moment to moment. So often we are running through a to-do list or we're multitasking, that we don't take the time to respect how we feel on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes we may have days where we're just feeling really energized and really able to get a lot done, and that's wonderful. That's great. But we also need to recognize that there are days that we're going to benefit from being a little bit more quiet, a little bit more introspective, and maybe we need to set more boundaries on those days to kind of protect our mindset. And that brings me to my second point, which is set boundaries. Set them and adhere to them. That may mean a certain time of day that is just yours. It could be even a short period of time, but to really respect that time. I know in a lot of corporations, they're building in some time after meetings so that our WebEx doesn't end at the 59th minute and we start on the hour for the next meeting. We really want to build in a little bit of time for reflection and taking care of our own needs. And then finally, and I think this is almost deceptively simple, ask for help. You know, I think some of the isolation of that we were practicing during the early part of the pandemic has led to sort of persistent isolation or a feeling of needing to do things on our own. And whether it's reaching out to family, extended family, neighbors, friends, you know, setting up a system where you can help each other and call on each other when you're struggling, I think is very important. Really just setting that cadence for recognizing how we feel, setting boundaries, and asking for help.
Brilliant. And as we begin to talk about mental health, I think that's a natural segue into our work. I would guess that the majority of us here on this call are working full-time or part-time. And working, and as Melinda said, and as Dr. Bethany said in her opening, women are the primary caregivers, but they're also working, so there's a lot of stress on them. So let's just think about this and think about the long-term implications of burnout. And if we think about burnout and think about the negative impact burnout has had, research has indicated that accidents at work are occurring 198% more than they were pre-COVID. And that is because when people are burned out, when they're experiencing digital fatigue, or when they're exhausted, they're not making good decisions. You can't make a good decision when you're that burnt out. But the problem with burnout is you don't know you have it until too late. And as you said, ask for help. It's that feeling of exhaustion. It's that feeling of being tired. So what implications are you starting to see as we move into a post-COVID work world? What do you think the pandemic will have on work, on hybrid work, and on families?
Melinda, do you want to start on this one, or I'm happy to if you'd like?
Oh, yeah, thank you for the offer, Dr. Bethany. I'll go ahead and start because a couple of things are coming to mind. You know what I think is fascinating, what I'm seeing in our culture is, have you heard of the term the great exodus or the great
Yes.
walkout? I think we as a culture are saying enough is enough because we're noticing that what's important to us is suffering, family, community, our health. And so I'm seeing people um, in a negative way notice that their health is really suffering, but in a positive way, they're saying I can't, enough is enough. And so they're looking at finding jobs maybe where they can work at home. I know that I've had many more people reach out to me as a dietitian and a health coach, a guided meditation practitioner, as well as an ancestral wisdom practitioner, to go back to the basics. What were our ancestors doing for stress management, and how can we get back into that flow? And so helping them understand what health means to them holistically, when everything else is falling apart. And when I say falling apart, I'm being a little dramatic, but when all systems are starting to be stressed around post-COVID situation, and our society still moving forward as if work has to still be done, they're taking a step back and looking at resources and what's important in honor of their health and their family and their joy, really.
So the trend you're seeing is a bit of self-care.
Absolutely. And it's even a buzzword. I noticed it in corporate America. Self-care is the new buzzword, which is awesome, right? I love it. People are taking ownership of their own health and being advocates for themselves in all areas, in their maybe in their communities, in their work environments, in their relationships, and also in their healthcare. They're going to their doctors and saying, "Hey, this is what I need, and I need you to listen to my needs, please." So it's exciting to see, actually.
It is, Melinda, and I think that's such a great point. One of the things that we're also noticing, and I think it has to do with that individual level advocacy, is that I think more and more leaders and organizations are listening and saying, hey, if we want our group of people here to be top performers and feel good in their workplace, we're going to have to listen, and we're going to have to make some changes to make sure that people are well in the workplace. One of the things I see there being a little bit of a double-edged sword in some of the flexibility that we are seeing in the workplace. I do think it's here to stay. The hybrid working models, I don't think are going anywhere now. But I think it's wonderful to a large degree. It allows so much flexibility, and that can work really well in that work-life balance. It can work really well to kind of bridge gaps geographically. So there's a lot good, but we do want to also recognize that for people who are already multitasking, sometimes it keeps that forum kind of open indefinitely. And so I do think we need to be very careful about those boundaries. And I do thankfully see many organizations doing this. I know at Frederick and the Medical College, we're certainly taking a look at what can we do to provide those boundaries for people who are maybe overachievers or really good multitaskers, right? Just because we can do 8 things at once doesn't mean we should be doing 8 things at once. So really putting an endpoint on those virtual meetings, and also respecting that people can use that flexibility in different ways. I think that sometimes even well-meaning parameters can cause some stress. And so a good example here is that, sometimes we may suggest to someone, not to be emailing in the evenings. But I think we need to consider that for some people, they may work more efficiently in the quiet of the evening or prefer to spend some time with their family or children in those after school hours, and then sign on a little bit later when they have time for themselves. So really allowing some of that independent flexibility, but then also providing the structure and support for individuals to take care of their own personal health and wellness.
It's funny you talk about the email thing, because we had a rule. We were working with global companies. We had a rule never to email outside of business hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit, and one of our team members has 3 children under 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had to email in the evenings. So you as a manager, I think this is another aspect of life we have to start talking about in this hybrid work form. You have to manage differently. And how, as a manager, are you going to make this shift? How are you going to say, wow, you aren't, as you just pointed out, working 9 to 5? And how do you, again, another question, how do you advocate for yourself with a manager that says, no, I want to see you online from 9 to 5, which is kind of, it's happening right now. So how do you advocate for self, and how do you advocate for your workers when you're struggling with that issue as well? And why don't we go, Bethany, we'll go to you, and then I'd like to talk to Melinda about it, because I think here is where we start talking about some ancient wisdom. We're doomed to repeat history if we don't remember it or learn it. So why don't we start with you, Bethany?
Sure, no problem. I think one of the first things we can do, and it may sound simple, but it's maybe not, is modeling that good balance for those we work with. Being able to say no when it doesn't work for us. And as you said, as managers, being able to listen to each individual's personal situation and see how can we make this work for you. For the person who has 3 young children, for example, during the pandemic, it would make a lot more sense for that person to be able to email in the evening or catch up on things in the evening. But I think the key is making sure that they don't feel shamed or pressured during the day. Otherwise, they've got 3 young kids running around and they're feeling terrible because they're missing this and missing that and doing whatever. We've got to figure out systems to work. And that might mean summary notes after each meeting so that we all stay on the same page. What are our bullet points from this meeting? How do we keep people on the same page, and making sure that we're not instilling a sense of shame for having a different type of schedule or needing that flexibility. I think it also does, and I'm going to go way back and talk a little bit about, again, why this might be even more important for women. And Melinda, I'm sure you're the expert here on this, but there's a lot of biopsychosocial research that suggests that women and men have developed over the centuries to kind of show different innate strengths that based on their traditional roles in society. And for women, that tends to be a strength in multitasking, being able to manage the children while gathering food, while preparing things, while cleaning, while doing this. And I'm just talking historically, right? And this is not across the board, but for men, the tendency is to be better focused at digging in on one task and seeing it through to completion. And so, again, we need to be aware as we're looking to create that flexibility in the workplace that we're not actually setting women up for failure, because there may be just too many things. And when the glass overflows, that's when we have to really recognize and pull back. Melinda, I'll toss it to you now, because I feel like I'm in your expertise zone. So correct me if I'm wrong there.
Oh, no, it sounds right on task and like recent history, but there are some cultures, like you mentioned, Dr. Bethany, where there was men and women tended to the community and had some of the same roles together. But in the recent history, it seems women have been able to multitask better. And I think what you're talking about, as far as my expertise, is understanding ancestral wisdom. So I appreciate that nod. And, I just wanted to go back to Dr. Mary's question about how women can advocate for themselves. is to know your gifts and values. This is so important. We as women, I feel, if I may say, in our culture, aren't really encouraged to be share our strengths or be really boastful about our qualities and our strengths. So it's sometimes hard for us to understand what our gifts and values are in the organization, and to know that and then be able to articulate that. This is what I bring to the table. In order for me to show up 100% or at least 90%, then I need these things met. And so the second thing is to understand what you need, and then to communicate with your manager with the understanding or the assumption perhaps that that manager wants you to also be comfortable and perform well. And then lastly, be okay with the outcome. Understand that it's okay, no matter what, to trust the process of life. I know that's easy for me to say, as an employed person. However, if we can just rely a little bit on faith when we know that our needs are met, that we've articulated our value and what we need, and if that is not being reciprocated in the workplace, then maybe looking for somewhere where you are supported, and trusting that process, trusting the natural unfolding of life is designed for your benefit, and that maybe you do need to move on and find a job that will value you.
How would you coach someone through that, Melinda? It's just fascinating what you just said. I mean, even if you just talk about maybe trusting the process of life, because that's a scary thing to do.
Yes. I feel that in, the academic worlds, in the clinical space where I work, and in the corporate America, we don't really talk much about spirituality. It's kind of a taboo even, right?
Yeah.
And that is a major important part of our health. Maybe we don't define it as spirituality. Maybe we define it as being part of a bigger picture, or being part of a community, or being in nature, whatever sparks that sense of well-being and joy, and that there's something bigger out there than just me. And so as a coach, I speak to that. I speak to that part of a person's health that normally doesn't get attended to unless we do something like go to a traditional church setting. But not all of us practice a traditional religion. But it doesn't mean that we can't be connected to that part of us who understands that we are part of a bigger picture that makes us feel fulfilled. And I know you two wonderful women probably know research based on the importance of being in community and being connected in relationship, and the benefits of it, as professional therapists. And so that's what I speak to when I talk about trusting the process and allowing to let go. And some people say let God,
I love that statement. The one research piece I always remember is people that practice spirituality live longer and are less stressed.
Yeah.
And it's just wonderful the way you explain that, because, basically you were just explaining the research I read. I always thought that was super interesting.
Thank you.
So as we go through, one of the, Pam and I are presenting a paper tomorrow at a conference called the Super Busy Paradox. And we're happy to make all the information available to you, but it's women suffering from this super busy paradox that I've got to have this in my career, I've got to have this, but I'm feeling like I'm failing here, but I'm doing really well here. And what we did is we looked at 532 women, and we did questionnaires, and the one word that came up all the time was overwhelmed. I'm emotionally drained. As a matter of fact, emotionally drained, 76% of women agreed that they were emotionally drained.
Wow.
Post-COVID. Now that's such a tiny sample size, but it almost hurt my heart to think that that's a big number out of 500 people. It wasn't what we were expecting. We were actually expecting burnout, for them to identify it as burnout. Of course, my hypothesis was proved wrong, which was great. But coping and resiliency skills are so, so important as a family member, as a human being, but also as a coworker and as a leader. So as most women are innovators, they have an innovation in them. That's how they multitask. I don't think we ever talk about that. But how would you and how would you think about helping them learn to identify these skills, and how to mentor them, because mentoring is a great way to bring women forward. And Diversity MBA, both Larissa and Pam, who I believe are on this call, have spent a lot of time helping women in this. How can we spend more time doing this? And what's the value of it? Because we all know that when you volunteer, this is going back to, I think, Alfred Adler, when you volunteer, you feel better about yourself, you're less depressed. So how can we build these skills through mentoring is my question to you. And have you experienced it? Would you recommend it? What do you think?
Dr. Bethany, would you like to lead on this one?
Yeah, I think, when we look at this big picture of women in the workplace and how we fit in and how we can thrive, we do need to really focus on our strengths. And I think that, throughout feminist theory, we see examples of how our societies have sort of trained us counter to exactly that principle. So setting boundaries or being assertive or being anything less than a selfless, compassionate caretaker may translate to being bad or unkind or somehow wrong. And I think that we see this portrayed not only, on an individual level, but also in organizations. And as we see more and more women in leadership, which is wonderful, there are reports of women having to sort of hide or feeling like they have to hide or suppress elements of their lives, such as parenting challenges or some of the things that are so central to who they are. And I really love this idea of not only, we don't want to just allow those differences, we want to celebrate those differences. We want to say, wow, look at this, great sense, like you said, Dr. Mary, that sense of innovation, that sense of drive, of creation, creating things and seeing it through. I think that that's so important. When I think that when an organization is not able to embrace that, or when in a professional relationship, even we're not able to embrace that, I do think that we see this kind of exodus where women tend to kind of excuse themselves from leadership positions. And unfortunately, then not only is that individual impacted, but the organization, those who are working with that person, and even the communities we serve are impacted, because if we don't have a good balance of different experiences at our boardroom tables, then, everybody is not represented. And so we need to, learn to embrace that and encourage it. And I love seeing organizations push back against some of the kind of old ways of thinking and really looking at how can we nurture this and keep things moving forward. Absolutely, we've seen a little setback here, more than a little. We've seen a setback with the pandemic because it has just pushed us to our limits in so many ways. But I also think that it may have created some space for us to really examine those day-to-day practices and just what message we're trying to be heard in our organizations, in our respective settings.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm hearing the word vulnerability too, being vulnerable enough to say, this is who I am fully. Speaking to your point, Dr. Bethany, about showing up with all your emotions at work in a professional way, of course, but even having us all having compassion, like we're all going through this difficult time together, and sometimes we may need to step aside and cry. Sometimes we may need to share what's going on, and maybe having resources at the job to be able to go and relieve or find support in that area. Something else that came to mind, Dr. Mary, when you were asking that question is, what I understand about ancestral wisdom is that there's an understanding that in order for us as feminine energy, feminine beings, because it could be in a same-sex relationship, in a same-sex relationship or any relationship, there is feminine energy and masculine energy. And the masculine energy represents structure. And the structure needs to be in place in order for the feminine energy to create, because we create environments, we create relationships, or we add strong components of relationships. In some instances, we create life. So my point here is that what ancestral wisdom is teaching us is if there is a balance of masculine and feminine, if there's structure in our lives, if there's structure in our environment, then there's space for us to create. And if we allow time to create, that's where joy and healing comes from. And creation can look like art, it can look like singing, it can look like dancing, it can look like spending time in nature and creating, picking foods and herbs and creating dishes. And so it could look different for everyone, but that piece of creating, once there's structure involved, is a good way to find balance in emotional, physical, and spiritual health.
Great points, Melinda.
And I love that you talked about that. I recently heard an interview that the great Billy Porter did, and Mr. Porter said that he doesn't do meditation. Instead, as a singer, an actor, a brilliant voice, I'm not sure if you've heard him sing, but he's brilliant. He listens to other people's music, or he watches Netflix. So that's his meditation space. And when you talk about feminine or masculine energy, there's just so much going on there, but the key is structure. If you go back to all the great thinkers in time, as I'm sure that we could go on to, they all had a structure to their lives. And that structure allowed them to be creative. Albert Einstein took a bath every single morning at 8 o'clock and had 3 eggs in the bathtub. Didn't get out till 9 o'clock. Every single day. Every single day he took a walk for 45 minutes at the exact same time, no matter what else was going on. Now, I don't know about you, but if I said to my clients at 2 o'clock, oh, sorry, the meeting's going, I'm going for 45 minutes, they'd be like, I don't think so, Mary. However, when you're Albert Einstein, I think you can do whatever you want to do. So, but I'm just saying, I agree with you. And I think the literature definitely shows that when you begin to create structure, you begin to unleash this innovative creativity that will help you relax and solve problems. Because when you are emotionally drained, your problem solving skills are gone. You're just racing through something. So what I like to do is I've been keeping crazy notes before we go to open it up. We'd love to open this panel up to questions. But what I'd like to do is just reassess the takeaways. And Melinda and Bethany, I'm going to ask you if I hit on some of them and if you want to expand on any before we go into questions. So some of the primary takeaways for me that I thought were absolutely amazing, and one of the things that we always want to look at is this idea of chronic anxiousness. Like, some stress is good stress, but if you're chronically, as you talked about earlier, Bethany, feeling this stress and feeling anxious, it's okay to ask for help. And the next part is to bring joy in your life. And I think when Melinda talked about the sacred nutrition plate, never thought about that. What a wonderful thing to do, to slow down your eating process and be grateful that we are able to have this food. And then number two, when we start talking about how at work do we begin to identify some of these stress triggers, we talked about this idea of stopping and taking inventory. And so one of the ways we advocate this at the Digital Wellness Center is deconstruction. Ask yourself twice a week a couple of questions. Deconstruct your day or deconstruct your week. And how you do that is you say, when I got stuff done this week, I did blank, and fill it in. And when I didn't get stuff done, this is why. And so for me, it typically is when I got stuff done this week, we go back to structure that Melinda was just talking about. I blocked off time to get things done. When I didn't get stuff this week, I was running to put out fires through email or spending all my time in reply all emails or any of those things. So think about those two questions. Think about finding, as Bethany said, quiet and introspective space in your day, even if it's just 5 minutes. Feel free to use any of the free resources we have at the Digital Wellness Center. You can go online, there's tons of different things. And one of the most important aspects of that is setting boundaries. And I loved that Melinda identified the new big trend for, I believe, 2023, which is going to be corporate self-care. And I don't know that it's going to be a buzzword. I think it's going to be a retention word. It's something we're going to need to think about. And the idea of ending meetings 5 minutes early, and understanding that people may have to email in the evenings or they may have to email in the mornings, but the summary notes of a meeting are a fabulous opportunity. And then talking about the balance. And Melinda gave a great example of feminine and masculine energy and building structure into your day to problem solve. Melinda, if I may, I'd love to turn it over to you first for any wrap-up comments before we go to questions, and then we'll go to Dr. Bethany.
Yes, thank you. You know, you pointed the summary that I wanted to offer, you said so beautifully already. So what I was going to say is some of the tips I would recommend is starting your day with structure. So the body loves structure. Waking up, having your bowl of oatmeal, a balance of a carbohydrate and a protein, if that helps. I like to start my day that way so that you're not having a sugar spike. Carbohydrates turns into sugar. And if you have just sugar or carbohydrate for your breakfast, it can cause a sugar spike, which can lead into anxiety unnecessarily. That burst of energy. And if you don't run or do something with it, it can lead to anxiety. And that's how you start your day. So a balanced meal at the same time every day. And then as structure. And then, as you just mentioned, Dr. Mary and Dr. Bethany also said so, taking deep breaths. That can be in the shower. It can be as you are tending to your children in the bath. It can be in any moment, just taking 3 deep breaths in through your nose, holding your breath for 3 seconds, and then exhaling as slowly as you can out your mouth. It can be done while you're driving. It sets, as you two know really well, it sets the fight or flight mechanism in your body and allows you to relax a little bit more. So remember to take those mini meds, as a great mentor once coined for me, mini meditation sessions. And then lastly, the idea of balance through reciprocity. And reciprocity is basically the practice of exchanging energy or services with others in your community for the mutual benefit of all. So just checking to say, hey, am I receiving as much as I'm giving? Do I need to receive more? Do I need to ask for help, as Dr. Bethany suggested? So to make sure that there's a flow of reciprocity going on in your environment, which is an ancestral wisdom term, indigenous wisdom term. So those are the takeaways I like to offer.
Wait, you forgot one. How do we get in touch with you to learn more?
Oh, right on. Well, thank you. So I'm working right now with these 2 amazing therapists, and we have a company called Nourish Well. So nourishwell.live is our website, and we create in person here in California and also online experiences to help women X culture take care of themselves, become more balanced. We are attracting caregivers in our community. So we're creating community for caregivers that are burned out and are looking for balance. And so if you go to nourishwell.live or Instagram is nourish_well_, you'll see our information there, and you can contact me that way.
Brilliant. Thank you. We will.
Thank you.
And Bethany, how about you for a quick wrap up?
Yeah, Melinda, I love what you said, and I really appreciate those really practical take-home points. I think that that's always so helpful, just to have some go-tos. If I can just do these couple of things, I'll be in better shape than I was yesterday. And just having those key takeaways in mind can be so helpful. One of the things that I just can't let this meeting wrap up without just speaking to is a sense of perfectionism. And I'm thinking about it even for myself as I'm listening to Melinda's points and all of the information that we're discussing today. And I think that there's a tendency for us to feel like, okay, I know exercise is good for me. I know a balanced diet. I know this structure and getting a walk and setting limits. And so we're taking all these notes and trying to get it all just right. And I think one of the things we have to also do is allow ourselves to make mistakes. I think we need to allow ourselves to do it wrong. We need to allow ourselves space to do it differently. And you've used, I think between Dr. Mary and Melinda, we've used a couple of different terms, but I think this fits right in, this idea of what we call tiny habits. And it's, once again, just attaching a little bit of mindfulness or a little bit of exercise to your already busy day, just allowing that kind of built-in break. And that could be as simple as when you pick up your cup of coffee in the morning, just make a habit of taking a nice deep breath and really appreciating it before you take that first sip. And if we attach these tiny habits to enough things throughout our day, we see that cumulative effect of that slowdown and that mindfulness and just grounding of reminding us what we're doing and why. So a workout doesn't have to be perfect. A meditation doesn't have to be 30 or 45 minutes. Make it fit, make it work for your life, and be, okay with flexing it depending on how you're feeling from day to day.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Just loving this conversation. And I just want to be aware of the time. We do have 2 more minutes left in the webinar, but I think it's okay if we just give everybody a heads up, let them know, because they probably have another meeting. But let's see if there are any questions from the audience.
Dr. Mary, this is Larissa. There was a question earlier, and it was actually for Melinda.
Great.
Someone wanted you to please repeat the tree tools for mental health. And I think this question came up, Melinda, when you were talking about the spiritual component.
Okay, the spiritual component of mental health. What I believe I was talking about joy.
Yeah, she did talk about joy, our capacity, our awareness of thought. Do you remember in the very beginning when we were talking?
Yes, I was talking about, I remember the song Joy and Pain, and realizing that, such is life, that we're able to, there's opportunity to experience the joy in the pain, the rain in the sunshine is how the song goes, sunshine and rain. And being able to, as Dr. Bethany spoke on, track our thoughts during those moments so that we can see when we are maybe going down a spiral of just focusing on the pain and missing the opportunity to find the joy.
Mm-hmm.
One example I think of and I'll make it quick. One example I think of is when we have, when someone passes away at a funeral. That is such a sad, sad time. However, how the community shows up for that person and supports that family is beautiful and offers an opportunity to experience joy. So there's always joy, even in the pandemic. There's opportunities to find joy in the midst of that. I hope that answers your question.
That's wonderful.
If
Go
there are
ahead.
any questions, please enter your questions in the chat for the panelists. We still have a couple of more minutes.
Oh, good. So we can stay a little bit more.
Yeah, this is Pam. Can you guys hear me?
Hi.
All right, so Pam McElvain, the CEO of Diversity and VA Media. This has been an incredible conversation. And when I think about what each of you do, it's almost like we need to be able to holistically package a bit of what each of you offer in our wellness plans. And how we do that is the fun part of putting that together. And so what I'd like for you to all do to help us start our wellness package is to each of you to give an advice, one thing, one action thing each person can do that's in your toolkit, so they can begin to build out their own toolkit. So Bethany, you can start.
Oh, sure. I'll tell you, I guess I'll just talk about something very practical that I make a point of doing, and that's just getting outside every day. And again, it kind of comes back to Melinda's point about connecting with nature, connecting with that higher being for you, and even in the winter, I think it's part of that recipe for feeling good. And so, putting some boundaries around that time. Sometimes that can be sort of a communal time where, I go with family or with my dog, and sometimes it's grabbing the cross-country skis and just going out on my own, no phone, that's key. Just kind of getting away from it all and being outside, just to have that space to think. And I think that's where, for me anyway, that's where I can best take inventory of what are my needs today? What is my energy level today? Where am I at? What do I need to do to succeed today?
Fantastic. No phone and skiing. Wild woman.
No, I was thinking the same
Right?
thing. That's great. And smart too. So my takeaway, I would say, involves food. I notice when I'm able to take a break and actually bring all my attention to what I'm eating and think about all of the components, all the people that were involved in bringing that food to my plate. We are so fortunate in this country, most of us. I know there's some out there that aren't as fortunate when it comes to having access to food every day. But in this country, most of us can have access to food. And if we think about all that's involved to get this nourishment on our plate, and then the quality of food that we're bringing into our bodies to allow us to have the best health possible for our body, that not only allows us to check in to see how we feel, it gives a sense of gratitude. And then also, if the food is something you enjoy, which I believe you should eat food that you enjoy, then that offers a sense of joy as well. So we all have to eat. So using that time as a way to be present and conscious of everything that's involved and allowing you to enjoy that meal so that you can be healthy and vibrant.
What a great point.
It's a very good
Love
point.
that.
Pam, mine is self-awareness and spirituality. Um, as Pam knows, I've gone through some quite difficult times, and it's really caused me, so every single morning I get up and say, this is going to be an amazing day, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to live it. And every single night I write in a little wee book I've got that says, these are what I'm grateful for today. And sometimes it's a great dinner. Sometimes it's a movie. Sometimes it's a great email. And sometimes it's just, good for you, Mary, you made it through the day. And that's, a really, I think, a powerful thing for us to remember is there are so many things to be grateful for in your day, but the most important is that you were here to enjoy your day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great point.
Thank you guys for that reinforcement of what you shared and making it so practical. I appreciate this time.
Thank you for having us today. And I really enjoyed working with these brilliant panelists. It was wonderful. And so I know I, for one, have learned 3 things, which I always think is the point of a webinar, to learn 3 things. So thank you, Dr. Bethany. Thank you, Melinda. I will definitely be looking up your website. I can't, Nourish Well, what an amazing name. I'm excited.
Thank you
so much.
Yes, thank you for having us. I enjoyed the conversation very much.
All right, thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining this dynamic conversation. I know I wrote down a lot of nuggets for myself, especially corporate self-care. That's going to be my motto for this year. So we had a lot of questions around, is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is recorded. And we will share a link with our member company partners that are members of Diversity MBA. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next month during our next webinar. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.